Hi readers, Chris here. Welcome to my bookish channel. Today I'm going to be doing a full breakdown of The Blue Sword by Robin McKinley. For those of you who have been around for a while, you will know that a couple times a year I ask for recommendations from viewers such as yourselves. This book was recommended to me by CJar. So Chris, thank you so much for recommending this book to me. I don't know if I would have read it if you hadn't recommended it to me, and I am so thankful for that. I'm going to do what I usually do, break down world building, characters, and plot. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk about The Blue Sword. Now, just to give like a little bit of background on this book is considered a YA fantasy now, today. However, this book was actually originally published in the 80s, in the early 80s. I want to say 82. In the early 80s. And at that time, there really wasn't YA, or at least not in the same way that it is today. If you went into a bookstore in the 80s, a Barnes & Noble, you would have the adult section, the kids section. There wasn't really a whole lot in the middle. So the fact that this book was written as a YA book in a time where YA didn't really exist is like mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing to me. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. So let's talk about the basic setup of the book. This story revolves around a young girl named Harry. I believe this is supposed to be her on the cover here. Harry is an orphan, and she is sent to live with like some extended family members in this town called Damar. In this world, Damar is a city that's kind of like on the edge of this kingdom. So Damar is the city on an edge, and on one side you have the rest of the kingdom, but on the other side you basically have a desert, just desert land that's filled with like these nomadic tribes. These tribes are called the hill folk, and Damar, because Damar is kind of this like outpost, out of the way type place, they do have a relationship with these hill folk, if you will. Now, these hill folk do have a leader, or currently have a leader. His name is Corlath. So Corlath, for all intents and purposes, even though they don't use titles in the same way that like the rest of the world does, he is the king of the hill folk. So Corlath comes to visit Damar one day, and he meets Harry. She's new in town. He sees her, and when he sees Harry, this, for lack of a better term, this feeling just comes over him. He's just completely taken with her, And at first, he doesn't know why. He doesn't know what is it about this young girl that is like just stopping him in his tracks. Now, this is not a spoiler because it is literally on the back of the book. So I'm going to read you what he says. So when he meets Harry, he will soon realize what Harry has never guessed. She is to become Haramid Soul, King's Rider, and carry the blue sword, Gonturin, which no woman has wielded since the legendary Lady Arryn generations past. So basically what that means is that Harry is destined to become this legendary warrior, this legendary female warrior, that the hill folk apparently have this legend about her. So Corlath, seeing her, knowing that, hey, she potentially could be this legendary warrior, he kidnaps her from Damar, takes her out into the desert, and then what basically follows is almost like, for lack of a better term, like the majority of this book is like one long montage of Harry assimilating into this hill folk culture. So she gets taken, but once she gets to the hill folk, you know, country in the desert, she has to learn how to talk like them. She has to learn how to ride like them. She has to learn how to fight like them. She has to learn how to wield swords. She needs to learn about their customs and why it's important to have a sash as a rider, all these different things. And then as she learns that and what she does with those powers and those abilities, that's what really makes up this story. That's what really makes up this story. So world building in this book is something that is super cool. I have the utmost respect for any author, creator that can not only create a unique like culture. So in this one, we have this unique kind of desert culture, but a culture that has its own language that's in this book, that has its own customs, that has its own belief system, that has its own heroes and legends, that has its own weapons. This culture of these desert people, these hill folk, is like, it's so thought out, it's so specific. I just think that's really cool. I think stuff like that is super, super cool. So because Harry is new to this culture, then she is kind of like our eyes and ears as she starts to learn more about the hill folk culture. We, as the reader, get to learn more about this culture, which I think is super cool, super cool. So if you are someone that likes that sort of world building where you really get into like the nitty gritty of a specific group of people, you will like this book. You will like this book. So now let's talk about the characters, starting with our main character, Harry. I think it was a very interesting choice to name her Harry, which is short for, like it says here, Haramid Soul, or I believe there's another name that she has that Harry is short for. But I think it's an interesting choice to take a name that seems very masculine and manly and apply it to a young female character. Because again, I want to call attention to, again, the fact that this book was written in the early 80s. And again, it's not like today where every single YA fantasy is about a strong female protagonist. That didn't really exist. So the fact that this young girl who was destined to become this great warrior who rides horses and wields swords and fights and does all this stuff, I mean, super cool, super cool. And I like that Harry is open-minded. She is open-minded. Yes, she is technically kidnapped in the beginning of the book. And at first, you know, she does resent the fact that she was taken from the only home that she knows. You know, it's not like she's just going along willy-nilly with it. But over the course of the book, as she starts to learn the language and the sword skills and how to ride horses, as she starts to learn all this stuff, she really does come to appreciate the fact that, hey, this is a whole separate culture, a whole separate world, and maybe I actually fit better into here than I realized. So I think that's really cool. I think Harry's a great character, a great strong female character, definitely not a pushover. And again, considering when this was written, I think that she's just such a good example of how a strong YA fantasy female character can be written. There's a lot of other characters in this book. We have Corlath himself, who he is a big presence in the book, but he's actually not as big of a character as you would think he is. Yes, he is responsible for kind of setting things off by taking Harry, and he does have a relationship with Harry, but through most of the book, it's actually like, I forget exactly what his relationship is, but Corlath's like right-hand man, his second in command, is this young man named Mathan, or Mathan, I guess, depending on how you pronounce it. And Mathan is really the one that becomes Harry's guide. He's the one that like really helps her along in her journey, helps her, you know, how to ride horses, helps her train on how to fight, on how to wear the right sashes, and how to say the correct language. Like, Mathan is really the one that is her guide, that is like the strongest figure throughout the most of the book. And I really liked him. I really liked him because, you know, when Corlath, especially when he first brings Harry into this culture, there is a sense of like, what is she doing here? She's an outsider, you know, that kind of stuff. But Mathan never questions it. He never questions his king. He's totally loyal to Corlath, and he never questions like what he's doing with Harry. He never questions teaching her. He never questions if she has the ability to be taught. He's just a really great character. I kind of almost feel that he's like a Samwise Gamgee type character, where he's just loyal to a fault, and I think he was a really good presence and a really good influence in Harry's life and Harry's journey throughout this book. Again, there's a range of other characters, both in the desert and back in the town of Damar. I could talk about a lot of them all day, but the only one I will mention is that there is actually a feline character named Narcon who Harry meets when she's in the desert. Another companion of hers that I particularly appreciated as an animal lover myself. That's all I'm really going to say about the characters. So now I want to touch on the plot really quick. And I've already kind of talked a little bit about the plot in the when I was talking about world building. So if you recall, I said there's a good chunk of this book that's almost like a montage. Harry learning how to do all these things. But the conclusion of the book, the climax of the book, is what she does once she finally has all these different, you know, skills and things that have been taught to her. So I'm not going to give that away because that's more into spoiler territory. So what I want to say about the plot is I kind of want to focus on how the book is written, how the book is written. And what I mean by that is that this book is written in a very classic fantasy style. So if you've ever read Lord of the Rings, the original Lord of the Rings, A Wizard of Earthsea, the Earthsea series, any of those like classic fantasies, that is very similar to how this book is written. And what I mean by that is that the book is very light on dialogue and very heavy on like description. Now, I would say it's not as bad as like a Lord of the Rings, which has like no dialogue whatsoever. Definitely not as bad as that, but I do want to throw it out there that it is written in that classic style. So if that's something that you struggle with, I would just want you to be aware of that. And honestly, it's something I have struggled with in the past. It's something I have struggled with because I'm such like a character person. Like my enjoyment of books is really driven by character development. When there's not a lot of dialogue, sometimes it can be hard to connect with them. But I think this book does a really good job of balancing dialogue, description, and like plot and world building. So even though it is written in that classic style, it also has a modern feel to it at the same time. And I can't really explain it unless you read it, but even though it's written in that classic fantasy style, the fact that it's a story about a chosen one who's a young woman. It's a story about this brand new, you know, culture that we're learning about. Like there's a lot of modern touches, and I feel like you can really feel that as you're reading it. So I think that makes this book unique because it does have such a balance of like classic fantasy, yet also modern at the same time. And yes, written in the 80s, I still feel like it has a lot of modern touches, even reading it now, today, in 2022. So needless to say, at the end of the day, I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed this book. I loved the world building. I loved getting to know Harry. I loved being part of her journey of discovery, of her adventure, of her getting to experience this whole new culture of people, of becoming this legendary warrior. I loved all that. I thought this was a really fun book, a really great read, and I'm only like annoyed that I did not hear of this book sooner. I do know, having now read it and talked to a few people about it on Instagram, people have read it. It's just because it's an older book, it doesn't get talked about as much. So if you're looking for a YA fantasy that's maybe more in a classic style, definitely give The Blue Sword a try. I really, really like this one. I definitely want to continue with the series at some point. I just need to pick up the rest of the book. If you've read The Blue Sword, let me know in the comments below, what do you like about this book? What do you not like about it? And as always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps me out. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel for more bookish stuff coming your way soon. All right, everyone, happy reading.